Big time fight coming up this weekend at 145 pounds. We have Mr. Finland, the most photogenic guy on Tapology, Makwan Amirkhani, taking on the Jawaiian Kamuela Kirk. Absolutely love the fight because for Kamuela Kirk, this is a guy that we saw in the regional scene for the longest time. We saw him on Dana White's Contender Series. We got pummeled by Billy Quarantillo. But apart from that, put on good performances on the regional scene in the States. And you look at it, he loses to Billy Q, loses split decision to Bruno Souza, and then his last two times out in 2021, he finishes Guilherme Santos with LFA, and then he main events against Daniel Swain not that long ago. He's taking this fight on about a week's notice, and he fought, 2 weeks ago. So it's kind of weird. I mean, really, in terms of damage, he had a little bit of a mouse on one of his eyelids, and that was pretty much it. The interesting thing going into that fight against Daniel Swain was the fact that Kamuela Kirk talked in a lot of interviews about the fact that his opponent was going to quit. He was going to quit, and Michael Chiesa was on commentary with Mr. Croc, and it was basically, man, I know Swain. I know him well, said Chiesa. He doesn't quit. What happened? Well, I'm going to quote you between the second and third rounds. "I'm done, Pablo. I can't do this anymore. I'm retiring," said Daniel Swain. And why? Because Kamuela Kirk put so much pressure on him. And there's so many things to love out of his game. This is a guy that comes out of, not fight ready, but he does come out of a very, very close gym with Santino DeFranco. And that's the thing that I like. It's Siege MMA. I love the kicks that he brings into his game. He throws a lot of leg kicks. He throws a roundhouse to the body. He can threaten up to the head. Doesn't throw a lot of volume or combinations when he boxes, but his boxing is crisp, and he does throw with a lot of power, and he does one of the most beautiful things that I love in MMA. Left hook to the body all day, and it's usually there against the majority of his opponents. Wrestling can be a little bit of a kryptonite. We kind of saw that in the Quarantillo fight, but hey, Billy Q's a pretty good fighter. Now you're coming in on really short notice against Makwan Amirkhani, former SBG guy. But here's the thing, Matt. Doesn't really train out of SBG, but kind of does. He's now out of MA Athletics? The Makwan Amirkhani gym.
Is Makwan Amirkhani that good at MMA?
Well, I mean, he knocked out Andy Ogle in 8 seconds.
No. Don't get me wrong. There's things about Makwan Amirkhani game that are good. Don't get me wrong. But when he really gets in there with other top-level competitions, he just looks terrible. Like, think about his fight with Shane Burgos. What did Shane Burgos do? I defend the takedowns, I make you tired, I box you up. Very simple. What did Edson Barbosa do? I defend the takedowns, I box you up, I make you tired. The blueprint's kind of out there for how to beat Makwan Amirkhani. This is my issue. There's some fighters out there who, listen, they might lose in different ways. They might get knocked out in one fight. They might get submitted in another fight. Makwan Amirkhani has this really disturbing trend of he loses in very similar ways in each and every one of his fights. He's a guy who, when he gets tired, he starts looking for a way out. And I don't want to question his manhood, but it's the truth. Look at the Shane Burgos fight. I will argue that Shane Burgos did not TKO him with punches. Shane Burgos TKO'd him due to fatigue. Makwan Amirkhani could barely stand at the end of that fight because the body shots that he was taking and because the fact that he could not get a takedown. He was so discouraged by the fact that he went like 1 for 13 with his takedowns, and he was so exhausted by just going panic wrestle, that if you can actually defend those takedowns, you can force Makwan Amirkhani to strike. And listen, I know I bring up Jack Hermanson a lot when I think about elite fighters who, yes, they might be a little bit uncomfortable on their feet. Makwan Amirkhani is a fighter who they're going to sell you as this guy's wrestling. One of the better wrestlers to come out of Europe in some time. Kind of. I've seen him not be able to take down other guys who aren't really great wrestlers themselves, to where I start to question how good his wrestling credentials really are. I know I'm ragging a lot on Makwan Amirkhani's game, but when I do see him in there with those upper levels of competition, and listen, a lot of guys out there are going to lose to Shane Burgos and Edson Barbosa, but this is my problem. When you've been in the UFC for a while, like Makwan Amirkhani has been, and when you've been marketed in a way that, listen, it's not like Makwan Amirkhani's like a Macy Barber where the UFC is like, this person could be a future champ, but Amirkhani's definitely more well-known than just your average unranked fighter. He's marketed in a way that, listen, Makwan Amirkhani should be in the top 15, and he's been given a lot of opportunities to really showcase his talent against top levels of competition. But let's think back at even some of his biggest wins. Jason Knight dropped him 3 times. Shane Burgos pieced him up on the feet. Like, I just have so many questions and concerns about the striking of Makwan Amirkhani that, listen, yes, he might go out there completely out-wrestle Kamuela Kirk. I could see that. But there's also another world where Kirk just defends his takedowns and he forces Makwan Amirkhani to become the shell of himself that we've seen in that third round, and he could just start teeing off on him. It really just comes down to who has the wrestling edge. Is it going to come down to the wrestling offense from Amirkhani or the wrestling defense of Kirk?
Now, for Kirk in a lot of his fights, he really pushes a crazy pace in terms of his pressure. Not necessarily his volume, but his pressure. He's a pressure-oriented fighter. And I look at it, and this is where it kind of scares me a little bit. But with Kirk, BJJ black belt from the research that I've done. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's what I read, and that's what I saw from Overtime Heroics, who I trust by and large. I do. They do a good job. Now, that was out of the preview for the Swain fight. Now, getting ready for a fight with Makwan Amirkhani. You know how slippery he is on the ground. He submitted Chris Fishgold, and you can laugh at Chris Fishgold in the UFC, but former Cage Warriors champ and a hell of a grappler if he's anything. He also submitted Danny Henry in his last win. The fight against Barboza is weird because it was really short notice, and you're taking on a hell of a striker. And
destroyed.
He got absolutely destroyed in a decision, but it was completely lopsided. So I look at this fight as an interesting one. Now, for Kirk, the fight against Swain was on short notice as well, and it was at 155 pounds. They have him listed at 155.8. This fight's at featherweight on less than like 2 weeks' notice, like a week's notice. So now you're just worried about cutting the weight. But the guy has the experience enough on the ground. We saw even Swain threatening with the armbar. We saw him threatening on the ground. He wanted that fight on the ground, and Kirk kind of gave it to him at points, but he was able to get out of all the really tough positions. So I'm eager to see this. I think if Kamuela Kirk came out with a game plan where I'm just going to blitz volume at Amirkani, it could make it a really interesting fight, especially where the line's at. Like, you look at it, Amirkani open to minus 305, he's a minus 280 right now. Kirk open to minus 225, he's a plus 219. And if we have a look at Tapology, 1,015 total votes, 92% Amirkani, 62% by submission. I mean, I think it's kind of silly, but like I can definitely see a world where Makwan is a submission specialist if he's anything. And if you look at his total wins by finish, it is primarily by, let's see, 11 by submission, 1 by knockout. But I have a hard time with MA Athletic here.
This is Amirkhani's fight to lose. It really should be.
Yeah, I agree.
He's been in the UFC for much longer, has much more experience against the highest level of competition too. I could see this fight kind of going like, remember when Brad Riddell fought Magomed Mustafayev?
It's the exact fight of Dakota Bush and Austin Hubbard.
I feel like my comp was good, so I'm just going to keep on going with it, where Riddell would get immediately taken down, but he'd be able to pop back up to his feet. And yes, he would lose in the wrestling aspect of the fight, but in the clinch, he would make sure he would get damage off. On the feet, he would always make sure that he was winning the exchanges, and he would just do enough that, yes, he might lose the wrestling, but he won the war afterwards. And yes, Brad Riddell won that very, very close fight. I could see Kirk having a similar game plan to Riddell, but this is my issue. Brad Riddell is one of the best strikers in the world, and he really he's built his whole game around, I defend takedowns, I stand up, I use my Muay Thai striking. With Amirkhani, he's better than just that initial takedown attempt. He can force the scramble to a certain degree. I know he couldn't get it done against Edson Barboza or Shane Burgos. I do think he'll be able to get it done against Kamuela Kirk. I don't think Makwan Amirkhani can beat elite competition. I don't, and I'm going to tell you that right now. But I do think he's going to be able to get it done this Saturday.
I'm going to go fishing again, Matt. Kamuela Kirk, again, submission win over Kevin Kroom not that long ago. You look at the losses. I mean, Billy Q, where the stat line's silly. Significant strikes per minute. Again, you don't ever want to look into these. Yeah, but when you see a number where the line, like the bar goes further than where it's supposed to go, 5.31 in that one fight per minute to 12.25 absorbed. It's not good, but it's Billy Q. But still, I do like the game of Kamuela Kirk. I'm sure if it's Santino DeFranco in the corner from Siege MMA, they're going to have a good game plan, even on short notice against a guy like Makwan Amirkhani. And again, for Amirkhani getting ready for this fight, where it wasn't supposed to be Kirk, it was supposed to be Nate Landwehr. A similar enough opponent, but I do like the parts and parcels of Kirk's game. I like that jiu-jitsu black belt in his back pocket. So I'm going to go with the underdog here. I've got Kamuela Kirk to get the win. You've got Mr. Finland, Makwan Amirkhani, but I absolutely love the fight. It is very, very interesting right here on the paper. Can't wait to hear who you have in this one. Matt, big fights in our main and co-main, both at heavyweight. You're not going to want to miss those. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it.